Hi, my name is Dale Brown, and I have the great privilege of being the senior pastor here at Community Church. And I'm here with our associate pastor, Carey Farlow. And today is another of the continuing times together to examine and talk about the Lord's Prayer. In fact, today is the final day of our time spent looking at the Lord's Prayer. After today, we'd like to spend a couple of sessions dealing with Advent and Christmas as we prepare and get our hearts ready for the great gift of Jesus to us and to our world. So today we're going to talk about two parts of the Lord's Prayer. One is lead us not into temptation, which seems really strange because God promises that he would never tempt us nor lead us into temptation. And Carey said to me before the program that he is an expert in temptation. I'm not sure what he meant, but I'm going to leave that with him. And then the second one is the closing of the Lord's Prayer, or the return to praying for, asking for God's glory to be made manifest. So welcome. It's good to talk with you for just these few minutes. And Carey, tell us about temptation.
I guess I'm an expert on temptation. Been tempted a few times in my life, but that line there in the Lord's Prayer can be kind of confusing, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Lead us not into temptation. Well, we know that God doesn't tempt. In James chapter 1, verse 13, God does not tempt us. I think what Jesus is saying and instructing us to pray is not to let us be tempted beyond our capacity to resist it. And God will not allow that anyway, because I started looking into Paul's epistles in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. It says, "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it." And it makes sense to me in a way when we're saying the Lord's Prayer, we're saying, lead us not into temptation, right? But I think of it in this way. Well, I pray that my kids are healthy all the time, but sometimes I give the specific prayer. I want them to be healed from something particular. And I think that way in temptation in the Lord's Prayer. Sometimes, my prayer is always that I not be tempted, but sometimes I want a very specific protection at a very certain time. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you need that. You need God not to just protect us in a broad sense, but in a specific way, and to guide us that we will stay within his will, and pray that we don't unnecessarily place ourselves in the way of temptation.
Carey, I've heard it described as a prayer for God to keep temptation far from us. And I'm always reminded when I pray that of the movie Fiddler on the Roof. Did you ever see Fiddler on the Roof with Tevye? There's the prayer for the czar that they have. Lord, bless and keep the czar far away from us. I think this is a statement about temptation in that same way. Lord, keep us far from temptation. Keep temptation far from us. Now, that's actually in the Gospels where the Lord's Prayer ends.
Right.
We, in praying the prayer, like symmetry. So we want to have a good beginning and we want to have a good ending. And so we're looking for balance. And so we have the prayer at the very beginning for God's glory, for God's name to be made glorious. And at the end, we pray again for God's glory in a way that reflects a later edition. I'm not exactly sure, when that edition was added. It's probably sometime during the life of the early church. I used to know, but then I forgot, and forgot to look it up for today. But it's a reminder to us that we begin this prayer focusing on God and God's glory and God's greatness. And in between, we pray for the world and the needs of others and even our own needs and for our own spiritual needs. But we also pray at the end for God's glory, again, to be made manifest, God's kingdom to reign and rule in our world. So when we think about the Lord's Prayer, here's the challenge that we have again. not just to know what it means, but to pray it and to live it out. So I'm going to go back and say to you, there are 3 or 4 really good times each day to pray the Lord's Prayer. And God does not mind us praying in this way on a regular basis. When we first get up, middle of the day, either dinner time or bedtime. Those are great opportunities to pray this model prayer that Jesus taught us to pray. And again, folks, it's the only prayer that Jesus said, pray in this way. There are other prayers in the Bible. Some are beautiful prayers, wonderful prayers. Some are situational, like you were talking about. Some are more general. But this is the only prayer where Jesus says, pray like this. And so if Jesus says do it, I guess I'm naive enough to think we ought to do that.
I kind of have a rule, Dale. If anybody rises from the dead, I kind of trust whatever they're telling me.
I agree. And so, yes, I think that we'll do that. We'll try that again. But then also, not just do we pray, we have to live into it. We have to flesh it out. We're talking in this Advent season about Christ being incarnate in human form. We've got to live out the Lord's Prayer. We've got to make it our intention. And that's why we go back to saying another way of praying it is that each day we take one petition. And that's our focus. Lead us not into temptation. How can I structure my life? How can I plan my day so that I'm not subject to temptations in needless ways? If we know that a certain type of program on television or on our computers is something that can lead us down a wrong path, then maybe we ought to not watch that and have some accountability built in. Or going to a certain location that has gotten us into trouble in the past. What is it that we can do to structure our day, to structure our lives, so that we don't get caught in temptation, but also if we focus on that, focus on the fact that we're to avoid temptation as much as possible, or that we're to bring God's name glory, or that we're to receive our daily bread and share that daily bread with others, or that we're to forgive others as they forgive us. Those petitions, if we focus on one each day, again, that leads us through the whole week, and we can start over again the next time. So next time that we gather, we're going to be talking about Advent. And Advent is the time before the birth of Christ, and it is a time of waiting. Do you wait well? Are you a good waiter? Not serving food, but can you wait well?
I'm fairly patient,
okay.
I guess.
Okay. So we're going to be talking about waiting and watching and not growing weary, but also preparing for the coming of Christ. And I've got a memory of a wonderful sermon that was preached in my presence as I was pastor at Whaleyville Church many years ago by someone you and I both know, and we'll talk about that sermon next time. Have a great day, and may God bless you, and please above all, pray and live into this prayer.